Communists are coming for your kids in the night. They'll turn them gay and make them hate their middle-class life. Communists are coming for your kids in the night. But you're next for the gulag, while the kids scream, might makes right. Communists are coming for your kids in the night. But you're next for the gulag, while the kids scream, might makes right.
Here we are again. Welcome to another episode. Boy, is there a lot of shit going on in the world right now. I'm sure you're just as elated about it all as I am. If you're somebody who likes to keep up with the news, we're living through a time where there's like 12 different headlines every day that are of massive consequence. And that's an interesting time to be living through as a human, I would say. But we won't go into too much about what's going on today, maybe a little bit, but today is going to be sort of a historical and philosophical analysis of communism. And I'm working with a good title here I kind of like. So, communism and Bolshevism. You could probably fit in Marxism instead, whatever. Marxism and Bolshevism and other ways of manipulating stupid people. That's the title of this podcast. And there's a lot to unpack there out of one statement. And I've been thinking about this for as long as I've been alive. I've been a very anti-communist person since I was a wee boy, but maybe in my 20s, my ideas on the matter changed a little bit. I have some nuance here. So if you hate communists, you're going to love this podcast. If you love communists, you're going to love this podcast just because I am such a charming and wonderful host that walks you through all of these very important things that you need to know and get ready for next Thanksgiving, next anniversary, next family get together. You need to have these factoids ready to start Gatling gunning people down. So communism, Marxism, why do we care? Why is it something that we give a shit about, right? If you're watching this show, you probably have a good head on your shoulders, and you've probably recognized a pattern of maybe people who are just generally lazy, or maybe generally like to be a victim, or maybe they're really, really hardworking and just kind of short-sighted. There's very few people, and they fit a very specific kind of archetype of folks who will say something like, well, real communism's never been tried before, or it usually follows like a criticism of capitalism. Somebody will say, oh man, these greedy billionaires here controlling everything, keeping us poor. Yeah, you're right. You're very right. Yes, that is an issue. It is an issue. But is it the issue? What did I hear? Somebody said this one time. I'm probably going to butcher this completely, but it's, here's the quote, and it's a quote from a great thinker of our time, Hotep Jesus. You might be aware of him. He says, concerning capitalism, society is advised to keep the baby and discard the bathwater. Concerning socialism and communism, society is advised to discard the baby and keep the bathwater. What does he mean by that? Well, we'll get into that. We'll get into what exactly he means by that. But why should you care at all about communism? Why is it something that you need to know a little bit about? Why is it something that you got to be, not necessarily ready to shut down people in conversation of, but it's all of our jobs, if you're a discerning, thoughtful, attentive human, to, as best you can, kind of keep the record straight. When somebody's just like out spouting lies, it of course might not be the best thing to confront them on that, call them out at every moment, because then every day you're just, running into wall after wall after wall. And a lot of times arguments don't really work with people who aren't thinking rationally, but it is our jobs to maintain an environment of truth at like a metaphysical level, right? So it's just important to know. It's important to like keep your heart aligned with it. And if you haven't fucking noticed, all of this Marxist ideology is coming back full-fledged, completely full-fledged. It's got a different voice and face and slightly different tactics, but a lot of that isn't like an ideological difference. It's not even like a difference of strategy necessarily. It's not even that people said, well, the first communist revolution failed for this reason and this reason and this reason. No, it's literally just a copy and paste with the disparities and the divisions that exist today. So wokeism is kind of that. It's this new cultural style of Marxism that's coming back around or decided to come around. And maybe we're sitting at a day-to-day where the Hydra has got a lot of its heads being cut off, and maybe there's just a couple left, and it's kind of like slithering back into its cave. But I don't know. You can't really beat the Hydra by cutting off heads and whatnot. So who knows if it's done? And maybe probably people thought communism was done forever when the Soviet Union fell, but it was just a short time later to where the soil becomes the same. And that's an interesting thing to talk about here, because it seems like to me that it's not necessarily that the ideology is perennial. It's more that the soil in which the ideological seeds could be planted is sort of a perennial thing. And it has to do with humans and our collective consciousness and how places scale and get bigger and bigger and bigger and how you deal with those problems of scale. But it is back. It is back. Wokeism is Marxism. And it's essentially, well, we don't need to go just there yet, but it's an interesting thing to think about, because I think once you understand a little bit about how the Russian Revolution went down, what Bolshevik ideology is, you start to draw some connections between then and now. So let's just get into it. I'm trying to make these videos a little more short and concise and not so just like blah, 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 me blabbering and blabbering, because I do love to hear myself talk, but I know not everything I say is super funny. So we'll try to keep this tight. So why it matters. 1917 is sort of this date that sort of marks the Russian Revolution, at least the kickoff of it. But the ideology itself was there for a while beforehand. And I've talked about this in a previous podcast that I think I might have taken off the channel, but I'm going to try to re-upload or redo. And it was talking about the coal wars in America, coal mine wars. And in that, I dove into a lot of the Industrial Revolution and the things humans were going through, the novel things humans were going through at the time of the Industrial Revolution, just strictly based off the fact that technology was changing, the very things that humans have to be good at and the problems they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis change when you go from agrarian to working in factories and in coal mines and around steam engines and on big ships and on rail. There's a whole different set of issues and dangers and problems and disparities, wealth disparities that come from industry like that, and industry becoming a thing of scale and getting bigger and bigger. And talking about the coal wars, it's like that industrial revolution and this rapid development and change is what kind of caught people off guard and led to the labor rights movement we knew of in America. Now, while that's going on here, the rest of the world is also industrializing. Britain is the first to do it first. They're industrializing in like the 1700s. Everybody else is kind of picking up in like 1820. I think it's like Britain, then like Copenhagen, Belgium, and then I think it kind of jumps to a little bit of Western Europe. And then by 1850, places like Germany, Prussia, France, Poland, maybe a little less, but those Central European countries are starting to industrialize too. And some thinking comes out of this new burgeoning industry system that we've got going on. Fiat currencies kind of becoming a thing. Big investment banking is becoming a thing, all centered around industry, because it's this like copy and paste thing. You know, once you figure out how to like dig coal, make a factory, make steel and everything, and you figure out how to make money doing it over here, it makes sense that you and your buddies will take some of that money and invest it in another place. And although Europe is really monarchical at this time and kings are kind of ruling over everything, there is some, you know, investment banking going on at a sort of international level between all these places. And if we get a little conspiratorial, this is sort of where the families like the Rothschilds, the Red Shields, which were an Ashkenazi Jewish family that moved to Germany, started this little investment bank, kept it within the family. They had more in common with their other Jewish friends and family members than they did the actual German people. And not that that's an issue. I mean, the Jewish people did kind of have the shit end of the stick for a really long time. And pogroms and whatnot in Eastern Europe. When the Muslim empires came and took places like Georgia and Turkey and all those Asia Minor sort of places, those folks had to move out and go east, and a lot of them ended up in Germany and whatnot. And they have their own culture, their own families. And to somebody who's like a native German at the time, you might think like, uh-oh, these people have way more allegiance to themselves and to some other place than they do us. And that's an issue for people back then because folks are still really xenophobic and whatnot. But the investment banking, all the weird stuff that we criticize today, this is kind of like a new emerging field at the time. And out of all that comes some new ideology, in particular a guy named Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, or maybe he had a different name when he started, but Lenin, everybody knows Lenin, Leninism, the guy who kind of coined the term communism, I believe, but he was a thinker, not from Russia. I didn't know this when I started. I thought Lenin was from Russia, but he's from Germany and came from an economic school there. But he was coming up in a time where Germany was industrializing, and the idea of labor rights and rights for workers, guaranteed wages, safety regulations, things just to like today that we would take for granted, all those things are kind of coming about. And the answer to do with the deal with all these new issues is like fascism is one of the things people are dealing with at the time, or one of the ideas people are playing with at the time is fascism. Socialism, communism, these sort of things are all things they're talking about. France is even a little socialist curious right now. Britain even like allows people to like have socialist meetings, and they kind of watch them, and they keep an eye on the communists in a really big way, but they sort of allow it to happen there. And then the Russian Revolution takes off. Now, why? This was a question I set out to ask or answer for myself when I was doing this research. Why was the Communist Revolution able to take off in Russia? Fair question. So Russia at the time, they call it Tsarist Russia. They had kings, monarchs. They called them the Tsar. And for a long time, leading up to the Russian Revolution, just like every other country in Europe, there was like a monarchy, an oligarchy, rich families, the ruling class, a very, 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 very small middle class. I mean, tiny little class. And then this big old peasant class. And Russia's a big old place, and it's mostly agrarian. And so peasants are just doing peasant things like surviving, making their own food, living day to day, not really so much worried about industry. But the Industrial Revolution sort of is on a bit of a lag going into Russia, because it's not till the late 1700s that the Russian military is even modernized to the point or up to the levels that the French military would have been up to. So, I mean, if you don't really have a big, crazy military and a navy and factories and everything, you don't need the Industrial Revolution just yet. So it came on a lag, and then it sort of came all at once because the king, the Tsar, of course, sends a mandate from on high down, and they mechanize and modernize their military all at once. And then the Tsar, before Tsar Nicholas, the one that loses power to the Bolsheviks in the Russian Revolution. I think his grandfather was the first one to even give away some power to sort of what's like a parliamentary system, right? So there's they're given little bits and little bits and little bits. And you got to think that England at this point has already had the Magna Carta, right? They've already had this social contract between the governors and the governed. And there's sort of an understanding, right? And there's been so much civil war and conflict in Britain that there's there's more of a belief at the time in Britain, I believe, and from what I'm reading, there's more of a belief that you could maybe transcend your social station a little bit more, and that it wasn't necessarily so bad to be a peasant because, you're a peasant in Britain, at least in Britain's the absolute best. And that ideology or that thinking, that mentality wasn't necessarily there in Russia. Russia is not a homogenous culture like Britain is. Britain is a tiny little island. They've had a bunch of wars and they've refined their culture over a long time. And sure, the Romans made their incursions. Sure, the Vikings made their incursions. The Danish, perhaps even like the Phoenicians at some point kind of came up there with their dark hair and settled in the south of England and left a lot of that culture there. There's a little bit of that, but much less so than Russia. I mean, Russia has a very violent and tumultuous history of, the Rus people to begin with. The Rus is kind of the root word of Russian, and that's not even an ethnic group that's very old. That's an ethnic group that's like starts in 1100, I believe, with this guy who comes from like Lithuania or up north somewhere in Scandinavia, Oleg. And Oleg comes down to unite all the Rus people and to make like a Rus capital in one place, right? So it's a little bit newer of a culture, and that culture is made up of a bunch of different people, and those people even look a lot different. Like people that are in like urban Russia, you might think of like the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, sort of Scandinavian, Viking-looking people. But then if you go far enough east, Russians just look Asian. And then if you go far enough south, they look Arab, because it's like all in that one area. So Russia is made up of a lot of different people, and maybe not all the peasants at this time have the same allegiance to the king or the same trust in the king. And probably the Tsar doesn't even have much power over people that are way far out in the Caucasus Mountains somewhere. So it's different. It's a different landscape in Britain than it is in England for sure. And maybe most of it can be sort of traced to the industrialization hitting all at once. And you can imagine why that would be the case if it hits all at once. You don't really have like a couple generations to build up a sort of tolerance and learn some lessons that you pass on to your son and he passes on to his grandkids. And then you all know how to like deal with the coal mine a little bit better or deal with whatever industry. Or maybe you're a little more specialized and you get some leverage now and you can build some resources. But at the time, it's really hard to gather and accumulate anything resource-wise to use as leverage for further movement at the time, right? So if you're a peasant, it's almost unthinkable to become anything but a peasant. So it's kind of dismal, and it's way different than our mentality here in America, because even though most of us, can't get our own thumbs out of our asses to do something that we say we would love or we like, we still believe that one day we might get rich. I'll make it big, I'll fucking write that song one day. It'll be a one-hit wonder bop, or I'll write that screenplay and I'll sell that to Netflix and they'll green light it and I'll get, blankety, blankety, blank. We all believe that there is some avenue out there still for us to make it big, even though we're probably fucking retarded and delusional for thinking that sort of thing. Because it is still a crapshoot. It's a dice roll, and it's very rare, and not even putting in all of your effort and all of your focus and attention guarantees it. There's a lot of like right place, right time, all kinds of things. But we don't even see all of that because the avenue is just big enough. And that avenue is just big enough to where we don't all feel like we have to rebel and behead all of the rulers so that we can have a chance, right? We've got just enough belief that we could to where we don't. And that's sort of the beauty of a capitalist system. If you can convince all those people that they could one day not be broke and living in a square box that's 600 square feet and costing you $2,000 a month. And, if they can convince you, though it might be shitty, if they can convince you that it doesn't always have to be shitty and all you have to do is just work a little harder, son, then you'll do it. And that might be a fucking sham. It might be a complete lie. I don't want to think it is. I still do think America has more opportunity, and probably we have more opportunity than just about any other humans in any other place have had to change our station. Although I do think that's true. It is good to know that if you want to keep some people in check and in line, history kind of shows this pattern. Well, you just have to give them some hope. If they have a little bit of hope, then they won't want to come fucking kill you, you know? But if you run out of hope because, you know, the rulers are saying, let them eat cake, like, fucking let them eat, you know? If that would probably piss me off. And I'd be like, okay, well, this is hopeless. Like, well, there's really no way out of this other than violence. And that's something I've been saying a lot lately. It's like humans always resort to violence when the system they live in misrepresents nature to such a degree. Now, what that such a degree is kind of a subjective thing, and it's a sliding scale, for sure. But I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm trying to paint a picture of what Russia might have looked like at the time and what the soil might have looked like. And I'm maybe trying to allude in a funny way, and maybe that's not even funny at all, trying to allude to the fact that the soil back then is kind of similar to the soil now, but it is on a sliding scale, like a relative sliding scale. And what do I mean by that? A relative sliding scale.
Do you have trouble finding meaning in life? Does it feel like you know too much about the world and it's spoiled the childlike wonder you had? Let's be honest. The world has always been fucked up, so don't blame the world. First, you should blame yourself for asking too many questions. And second, try our new product. The folks who brought you the Labato Shock are proud to announce their new superfluoride water. With all the right-wing extremists taking out the chemicals from your public water, you may be finding that your brain is working too well. This often feels like one is waking up to a world that has been stolen from the common person. This, however, is a subversive delusion that causes malignant behavior and is often the cause of malaise for modern people. For instance, last year it was discovered that 9 out of 10 doctors say that asking them about how much Pfizer paid them is bad for your mental health. In response to this breakthrough science, we launched superfluoride water. Drink superfluoride water and bring those IQ points back down. Professional wrestling is totally real.
I mean that people back then, the Russian peasants, felt that it was hopeless, right? They felt it. It didn't matter whether it was true or not. Turns out it was kind of true in their situation, but they believed it, and that belief became reality, and that belief turned into a revolution that killed many millions of people. So belief's a lot. Today, it seems more and more there's a lot of people that believe they live in a hopeless society in which there is no way up or out. And I mean, with the amount of people living paycheck to paycheck and buried in debt and getting tricked into college degrees and rent going up and up and up and our currency becoming inflated and gas prices fluctuating, I mean, you could start to see maybe how people would be like, oh, this shit's fucking hopeless. I mean, where are the guillotines at? The reason I say it's a relative and sliding scale is because obviously the average person today has much more hope, just objectively, to change their station and make a better life for themselves than a peasant in Russia in 1890 or 1902, especially post-World War I, you know? So it's a sliding scale, right? And it is relative, but it doesn't really matter what the objective truth about the whole thing is, because the people at this part of the timeline over here in 2025, a significant amount of people believe that it is hopeless. And so if there is no hope, the soil is right. Because there's little seeds that'll come in. Little seeds. People drop them in. And these seeds are subversive seeds. They're subversive little weed seeds, and they'll get into the cracks in the pavement of your character and your country, and they'll tear at the social fabric with their little roots because they get all in there. But the soil's the same. The soil is the same. Okay, so it sounds there like I do have some pretty steep criticisms of capitalism. Sure, yeah, definitely do. Capitalism is a system in which people make agreements and people are corruptible. So if the system is made of nodes and those nodes are people, then of course the system is corruptible. But is it more or less corruptible? Is it more or less efficient than, let's say, socialism? So let's think about this. Why is it a bad idea? Why would it be a bad idea? What can I tell my friends who have got the blue hair, they've got the Trader Joe's bag, they've got their list of grievances that they're reading off of a shit post on Reddit that's, Karl Marx ideology. What do you tell that person who is so well versed in the Reddit forums? Well, maybe I would start like this. I personally am a communist with my friends and my family, people that I really love, people that I know very well, and people that I feel like that I have a shared sense of accountability with. Why is that? Because probably what most people think of as communism, the idea that they have of communism, a communal way of living, is probably as closely representative of what it would be like to live in a tight-knit tribal community in which everybody's kind of your family or your cousins or you extended family or something, group of 200 people sort of all doing the same thing, your tribe, right? Now in a tribe, in a group of 250 people, let's say, I'm saying 250 people because there's some number and I'm forgetting the name, so we'll pause real quick. Dunbar's number, that's what it is. Dunbar's number is actually 150. So it's this social science theory. A theory that says most people have the capacity to really care at like a level of care, like really love and care for about 150 people. So imagine you're in tribal society. Everybody takes care of each other, 150 people. It's like about as big as like your high school class. And these are all the people you've ever known. These are most of the people you'll ever meet outside of like the other tribes that'll come through and whatnot. And out of that 150, you feel like most people know what their job is. They know what they're good at. They know what they can do, and they know what's expected of them, right? Because it's a lot harder to be a shithead who doesn't want to help or do anything if there are people around you that are going to have to bear the consequences of you not doing that. You can imagine in a tribal society, somebody who doesn't want to work for food or doesn't want to do anything, they'll probably just get like kicked out of the tribe pretty quick. And then they got to go, run, and they'll probably learn their lesson and come back. Or maybe it was just even unthinkable to be the lazy bum who doesn't want to get out of bed in the morning because you've got chalupa dust all over your chest. It's probably a lot harder to do back then. I don't even know how you'd make chalupas in a tribal society with teepees. I don't think they had the technology to make chalupas. So I don't know how you would end up being that lazy person, but you probably couldn't because you've got friends and family around you that, one, care about you and also care about their own survival. And everybody's sort of in this together. And, a weak link kind of brings the whole thing down. So it makes sense in that scenario where everybody knows each other and everybody's accountable to each other to share resources. Because if somebody gets greedy and out of line, you're going to notice really fast, and there's going to be an easy way to mitigate that, right? Because everybody sees kind of what everybody's doing. And people who are like secretly greedy and get caught stealing, it's like, you may as well be like, that's like an offense punishable by death in most native cultures, stealing from the tribe and being greedy and keeping for yourself. That's fucked up things people don't do. And imagine, most families are pretty fucked up. And if you're watching this channel, you probably don't come from the best family. But if you've got a family that you somewhat love, just imagine that. Imagine how annoying it is to go on vacation and somebody is complaining the whole time, doesn't want to offer any solutions on what to do, can't decide on what they want. That person's a problem. But if you're in a family, you can kind of like mitigate it and keep it going, And if you take that situation and go put it in the woods where everybody's survival is sort of dependent on how you act and what you do throughout the day, it turns a little bit more from a vacation. The stakes are a little higher, and you could just see people wanting to help each other out and be accountable, and the system working a lot more efficiently because it's easier to think about what is good for a collective of 150 than it is for 150 fucking million people, right? And that's the weird thing. So I'm a communism with my friends and my family, or I'm a communist with my friends and my family. I am sort of like a conservative sort of socialist. I'm a socialist that loves the compartmentalization and decentralization of a republic at the state level, let's say, right? At like a little bit bigger collective. You know, there should be some sort of collective agreement with you and like all the other tribes around you, maybe. But it's a little bit looser. You know, I've got more in common with the people that live in a 200-mile radius to me than I do a 2,000-mile radius, but not as much as a 20-mile radius, right? So sharing resources at the small scale, cool. Kind of sharing them with some limits at this medium scale. And then when you get to the scale of a fucking nation of millions, hundreds of millions of people, how can anybody operate in the mindset of, okay, I need to think collectively. I need to think collectively about what's best for all 360 million people. Good luck. Good luck. Have you ever tried making dinner plans with more than 6 people that like everybody is satisfied with? Impossible. Imagine that having to work iteratively in an economy where everybody is trying to work on this fucking fairy tale idea of what is best for the collective. And nobody really has a good idea of it. Maybe the party does, and they've got a really clear cut idea of what is good for the collective. And if you stray outside of that good for the collective, well, then you're fucked. But that good for the collective is defined by a group of people who now have power. And to challenge that power is to go against the collective. So you can see how quickly that will devolve and go downhill. And then pretty soon it's not about being good for the collective. It's just not about coloring outside of the lines. It's about social homogeneity. Keyword homo. Do you see what I mean? It's like a philosophy of scale. The more people you add to it, the less efficient it is for everybody to be thinking collectively. So I think that's what the idea behind a free market system was. It's like, okay, well, if we're going to hang out and be affiliated in this large of groups, maybe there's a new system that we should implement here. And maybe it's one that it's not lying to ourselves about what human nature is. It's not lying to ourselves about how good we all can be. As good as you want to be and as good of a person as you might think you truly are, you're probably really a good person to like the people you know, right? It's hard to be a good person to people you don't know, right? It's hard to care. But it's easy to be a good person to the people around you. And I think the inefficiency comes from this, right? So what do you think is more reliable to depend on? Is it more reliable to depend on the average human to be altruistic? Or is it more reliable to depend on the average human to be self-serving? Think about your own mind and be honest with yourself throughout the day. Do you have more thoughts and more actions that are like self-serving for you and your family? Or do you really think of a collective like I am one with all things, I am connected to all, there's no difference between me and this rock? I mean, that's like a real Buddha sort of mindset, and that might be like the cosmic and metaphysical end of the road that we want to get to where there are no borders between my skin and your skin and the rest of this universe, and you see everything as like this oneness. But unless we all are part of a hive mind, I just don't see how that works. It seems like a much more efficient system to depend on every person to take care of themselves and their own. It's like the thing in the airplane where you take care of your own goddamn oxygen mask before you start doing others. Because if everybody's worried about other people's oxygen masks, we're going to have a whole airplane full of passed out people that are just going to be dead on the floor. And that's communism. I hope that metaphor makes sense. So that's sort of why philosophically, ideologically, it doesn't work. And if you want the proof of why it doesn't work, I mean, Jesus, we've got so much proof on why it didn't work that first time. And the only thing people in modern times can use to defend all that happened in the 20th century, all the death that happened between the Russian revolutions, the Chinese revolution, Southeast Asia, all that. The only thing that they can say is, well, it wasn't really communism. We didn't really try it. It turned authoritarian. And that's like the Trotskyite thing is like, well, Lenin had a good idea and then Stalin took it too far. And it's like, okay, well, no, no. If you look back at the Russian Revolution, what was promised and what was delivered are very, very different things. And as some people might say, some people were more equal than others. That was the worst Russian accent ever. But I was talking to my grandpa who did a mission trip out in Ukraine and helped like put churches back together after the Soviet Union because it was pretty bad going for Christians during the Soviet Union. A lot of churches closed. A lot of people weren't allowed to worship, because Christians tend to be moral, and there's a lot of immorality that comes in a Bolshevik revolution and a Soviet empire. A lot of things Jesus said not to do, they were doing in that. So you can imagine being a Christian having like some kind of moral qualms with what's going on. And having those moral qualms means you're going to dig potatoes in Siberia for the rest of your life. Tough titties. So he was over there and he was on a train going through Russia somewhere. And he looked over and saw this giant, big, like bourgeois looking mansion. Use the word bourgeois on purpose there. That's a little wordplay if you're halfway educated on this. And he asked, like, okay, how old's that building? He's like, well, that was built in 1960 something or 50 something. This is a really big, beautiful, ornate building. Yes, that was built for the commissar of something or other, some Communist Party official. And my grandpa, of course, asked, well, I thought all people were equal in communist Russia. And he's like, oh, yes, they are. But some people are more equal than others. Meaning that, sure, people weren't necessarily vying for a stack of numbers in their bank account or a stack of like cash somewhere, but what does cash get you anyway? It's leverage and power to buy things you need, right? And so if you're taking away all the money, like, sure, you don't have to pay off the people who are keeping everybody else in line, but you can make sure your commissar lives in a way bigger building than everybody else, gets food all the time, his kids get the best education. And if you're somebody who tries to buck the system and say, hey, this isn't fair, or like, I don't want to be doing this, or, what happened to my fucking textile business? I was really liking that. Why is that being, you can't argue with any of that, because arguing for your own rights in Soviet Russia or in communist Russia in 1920 means you were arguing against the collective good. And to argue against the collective good is like stealing food from your fellow man. And they're like, got really serious about that. And you would get thrown in a fucking gulag even for just thinking about you and your family first. Imagine how hard that would be to do to be a human, where you're like looking at your kids and having to make this decision in your head where it's like, okay, do I watch my kids starve or do I eat them so that maybe next year we can have some more kids if there's more food? This is like something people are actually thinking. It's like, do I want to watch my kids starve and freeze to death? Or would it be less suffering for all of us if I just ate these kids now, and then in a couple of years, maybe when the famine's gone, we'll maybe have some more kids? Can you imagine having to think about something like that? This is line of thinking that families at the time were having to have. So how do we know it doesn't work? Well, some people are more equal than others. Approximately 20 million people ended up dead. Multiple ethnic groups of people ended up getting genocided and all thrown into a particular camp, because the thing about living in a collective society is if you have like a little group of people and you've got a lot in common, and you've got a lot in common with Russians, but you have even more in common with your Russian book club, right? The people in your book club look out for each other and care about each other, right? And so that is a threat to the state and the system, because you cannot have any allegiance to anything other or anything higher than the government, right? Your family, yourself, those come down. The collective is first. And who defines that collective? Well, the party does. And then the Communist Party just becomes the next monarchy. They become the next oligarchy. They hold all the cards, they hold all the power, they hold the monopoly on violence, and they hold all the peasant class in a grip. There are inefficiencies in a communist system, and we've got historical proof of this, the folks that didn't end up in a gulag or didn't end up shot in a mass grave or didn't end up, in a work camp or something, the remainder of all the people that died just starved. They just starved. Because as it turns out, a communist system is really not good for producing a surplus or even like producing enough food for everybody, because it is an inherently inefficient system. There was enough food in Russia before because it was decentralized. Little tribes and villages were growing their own food for them, and if they grew more than they needed, well, that's how you have a surplus. But turns out when the central planning comes from the top down, from one central node, and then has to, this one order, this one marching orders from the top has to come down, and it has to make sense for everything, right? You can't, like as a farmer, just determine your own policy and go get your own stuff. Everything is allocated. Tools are allocated. Seed is allocated. Farm implements are allocated. Labor to pick the crops is all allocated, and it's all allocated and organized from one central office. And that central office is, of course, prone to corruption. The way you get ahead in an office like that is by selling out other people and claiming, well, the fucking Joneses over there, I heard them talking about freedom and liberalism, and well, we're just going to have to go take them out. I am always on the lookout for these sorts of things. I grew up with these people. I love them so much, and it tears me apart, but I'm really loyal to the Communist Party, and I got to throw them under. And the next thing you know, you've got a promotion. You got a promotion. And now you're the guy who gets plenty of food all winter. And so when the famine hits and the inefficiencies hit and people start starving, well, you don't really care because the party's hooked you up and you've got enough food. And those peasants are complaining because they don't really care about the collective good. They're just caring about themselves. They're worrying about their own stomachs. And how selfish of you to be worrying about your own stomach. How selfish of you to be looking at your emaciated, typhoid-ridden child over there eating a mud pie, but it's not even, it's a frozen mud pie, and he's crunching and crunching and crunching on it, and the texture of it doesn't even sound good. At least if you're going to eat a mud pie, you could expect like a soft-served texture, but these poor Siberian peasants are eating frozen mud pies, and you're looking at that child and you're thinking, well, I just wish I could feed him. I might go, grab a couple seeds or go kill a deer out of the woods, and I'll just keep it here. And no. What are you doing? What are you doing? You weren't thinking about feeding yourself, were you? Because you need to be toiling away, working for the collective good, and it looks like you're kind of trying to find food for yourself. And it sounds like you don't really trust us, because we said we were going to get all the food for you. So like my feelings are just really hurt that you would want to go out and get food on your, you know what? You've hurt my feelings too much. Away to the gulag. I really cannot believe you would try to feed yourself like that. You knew food was coming next month. You knew the food was coming next month. How dare you? How dare you? We're all in this together. We're all in this together. We're all in this together. High School Musical was a communist MK Ultra sort of like trance hypnotization. We're all in this together. Why do you think everybody's gay and communist now? Zac Efron. That's why. That's why. So there's inefficiencies. There's the death. There's the big old pile of bodies. There's the people starving. There's the inequality, bald-faced inequality in light of promises that promise inequality. It's the most upside down inversion of reality sort of thing you could think of. And to live through a time, I mean, just the ultimate gaslighting. The ultimate gaslighting. But you know what communists had before they had gaslighting, like literal lights that you turn on with gas? Well, that's not how it works. The phrase is, what did the communists have before candles or candlelight? Well, they had light bulbs. Yeah. Anyway, what I mean to say there is that communism also, on top of all these other things, stifles innovation. And you can, look back through history and look at the lack of innovation that comes out of a lot of these places and just the complete stagnation that comes from a true authoritarian communist system. Because not only is it inefficient, what you're doing is you're completely disincentivizing those who are willing to work way harder than everybody else for no other reason than they just like to, or they want to, or they need the validation, or they're trying to impress some girl. Like, for whatever reason it is, there are some people out there, the 80-20 rule, 20% of people do 80% of the work. A very small number of rivers on our planet have a majority of the water, a disproportionate amount of the water even. A very small number of stars have a very large and disproportionate amount of the mass in the universe. It's a law of nature that once things start attracting and accumulating things, they accumulate more and more and more, sort of in an exponential sort of way until it pops. Like, think of a star, right? Like, a star is the gathering of all this hot material, and then it fuses because it's so fucking tight in there. And then one day it blows, and then like scatters off into a bunch of other stuff. And then eventually the other shit ends up gathering in some other gravity well and making really tight there. And then that law of the universe, it goes with everything. It goes with people. Some people are just willing to work more than other people. And communism promises equal outcomes, when free market system promises equal opportunities. But when you try to square off the outcomes, you're ignoring the people over here and completely disincentivizing them from doing anything worth a fuck, right? You're taking away all of their motivation to do that. And so you don't have the Thomas Edisons, you don't have the great inventors that come around and make, crazy inventions. You don't have great artists that make crazy stuff just to get laid. You don't have you don't have Led Zeppelin come out of Russia. You don't have Led Zeppelin come out of Russia because there's no reason to be specialized like that. There's no reason to really find your lane and find your niche and go for it. There's no achieving your dreams. Like, what people don't understand is that the end of the road of communism is somebody treating you like a worker ant, like you're a bee in a hive, and it doesn't matter what you think you want to do. It doesn't matter what you think you're good at. It doesn't even matter what you want. Because there's a group of people that are smarter than you at the top that have decided you can't make decisions that are good for you in the collective, so we're going to make them for you. We're going to make them for you. And what's so funny is the most like, I'm a rebel. It's these people who want to rebel against their fathers or whatever, and don't realize that once they get the system that they're arguing for, they're going to be put in a box where having blue hair and tattoos and being different means you go to the gulag, you dumb fuck. Like, you can't be an individual. You can't be my weird, unique self. Your feelings aren't even valid in a communist society. It's so crazy. It'd be so crazy to ask the commissar to not invalidate your feelings when you say, well, I have dreams. I wanted to be a painter. Well, no, you wanted communism. And you have this idea that the world should be fair, and it should be fair according to each person's perspective. It should be life should be objectively fair from my point of view. What? When has that ever been the case for any human or any animal or any conscious thing ever? Life is fair. It sure as fuck is fair on the grand scale of things. On the macro, life is very, very fair. The selfish and delusional thing to think is that your perspective in life is the only one, and that life is going to be fair according to you for your whole life. That's fucking crazy. That's wild. And wanting that, pursuing that, is the very same thing that will shackle you in the end from being able to even do that. Does that make sense? Like, you want to be treated fairly, you want to be whatever your idea of fair is, and you see that there's a wealth disparity out there. So everybody should just share. Okay, fine. Everybody shares now, but you don't get any agency over your own life. Sorry. That's the only way a collective can work, is if we all turned off our brains, became super docile, and all worked in a hive mind. If we all worked with a hive mind, maybe this sort of shit would work. But it just doesn't. It just doesn't. Humans aren't programmed that way. And despite what anybody would say, all humans want to be treated like they are capable of making the right decision for themselves and their families and ultimately the collective. But, As long as you're playing by the collective rules and not taking things from other people, then pursuing what's best for you and your family is kind of good for the whole, right? The more good, solid families we have, it's like the more people have their oxygen mask on. And once your like oxygen mask or your lifeboat, your raft is built, then, you know, you can maybe help out a few other people and keep them from drowning. And it doesn't mean everybody can come on your fucking boat, but the way to make a strong society is to have strong units of the smallest possible. So you want strong individuals and you want strong families. And if you have strong individuals and strong families, then you can have a strong collective as long as we're all moving in the same direction and we're incentivized in the same way and we're not killing each other and stealing each other, as long as there's a clear set of rules that are written out. Now, where I will make a concession is that those clear set of rules that have been laid out have kind of been thrown out of the window. And so to the communist blue-haired retards' points, what I will say is that, yeah, the game has been kind of rigged against people. It's like we started playing Monopoly, but a few of the people on the game board have decided to collude with each other. Like the person keeping all the money and the banker has colluded with the guy who's sitting next to the chance deck and is sitting next to the guy who owns Boardwalk. And they kind of have like a deal where, you know, if you land on chance, you just get to dig through the deck and pick out the best one. And those people now have a disproportionate amount of the money and they're keeping you out of the game, not because Monopoly isn't a fair game, because they changed the rules. They changed the rules and they're breaking the rules and they're not playing fairly. So can we just make the rules be played fairly? Can we do that rather than flipping over the game board and get rid of all the money? That doesn't sound fun. I want to at least like believe that I can work hard and change the way things are in my life. I gotta believe that. I think you have to believe that too. And you might not be being honest with yourself about how much you need that belief, but if it were taken away from you, I think you might quite miss it. So getting back to my original point. Marxism, Bolshevism, and other brilliant ways of stirring up mobs of dumb people. Because that's essentially what it is. I want you to imagine this scenario that you're in class, right? You're in a big class and you're a C student, right? But you're a C student because you just like, you know, you're a clever C student though. You understand people and you understand mechanisms a little bit. And so one day, the teacher, all right. Imagine if you could trick the teacher and you have your classmates and there was a pop quiz given and everybody takes the pop quiz. And you can imagine that the grades are on a bell curve with your A's up here, everything above 90%. And then in the middle is sort of your C's, right? The average. And then on this side is like the D's and F's, right? So let's say there's probably 10 people that all got A's. And of those 10 people, like let's say there's a 92, a 93, a 95, 199, you know what I mean? And so let's take, so there's those 10 people and they all have A's. And let's say there's 35 people that all have C's. Bigger group in the middle, right? It's a bell curve, right? The biggest group is this middle part. And the extreme cases are the A's and F's. So the biggest group, the biggest voting block would be that C, right? And so let's imagine that you're a disgruntled C student and you come in with a little bit of knowledge of Marxism. What you might be inclined to do is to come in and convince all the other C students and D students that the quiz was rigged from the beginning. The teacher has rigged this against you. It's not fair that you got that grade on this test. And the reason those people got A's is because they got special treatment or they got a special leg up or it's just not fair. It's not fair. So what do you plead? You play the democracy card, right? And so you and your other 35 plus 5 F's cohort, 40 people now, way outvotes the A's, okay? So you can see how those people that had the C's, if they're convinced that they didn't get a C because they deserved a C, they got a C because the system was unfair. You can see how those people would feel perfectly fine voting for a policy that says, okay, well, we're going to take away all the points from the A's, level it out so that we all have a B, right? You move the sliding scale up a little bit. You take those extra points and you spread them out to everybody else to increase the curve or to to increase your points, right? Now, is that fair to the people who made the A's? Well, I don't know. I guess it depends on how fair that quiz really was. But I'm saying communism and Bolshevism is the best way to rile up a crowd of dumb people because, all right, maybe we'll think about it like this. You're a fairly smart person and you understand the game really well. And there's a bunch of people that have kind of started and have a bunch more resources than you, and it's really hard to get into that ivory tower. It's really hard to get up on that hill with the rest of them, right? And there's no barrier to entry. So, but what you know is that crowds are irrational, and crowds of people don't think like individuals. They think with emotion. The best way to overthrow that group of people over there that have all the power is to rile up this even bigger group of dumb people into thinking that those people have more than them because of an unfair system. So it's like a couple smart people will rile up a bunch of midwits into thinking the whole system is fucked. And then those midwits will explain it in a really simple manner to the dimwits. And now you have a whole cohort of unexceptional people that are willing to take the rights away from other people to justify why they have never done anything good in their life, right? So if you want to overthrow some people, if you want to establish a coup, it's like you have a weapon of mass destruction, but it's like a subversive ideology. It kind of sounds like a weapon, doesn't it? It's kind of starting to sound like a weapon. And I had everything that we talked about up to this point. I've been mulling around for a while, maybe even years. Those thoughts haven't really changed. Maybe they got a little bit more high definition up to this point, but none of that was really a surprise to me in my research. What came as a surprise to me, though, and might be where we get into a little cuckoo land, wacko land, conspiracy world. Are you ready for this one? I don't think that communism was an organic phenomenon in Russia. What I'm starting to think is that the elite banking cartel of the day, we might want to call them British, but essentially the City of London, which is its own private banking entity outside of the City of London even, and the country of England, very different things. I think that system that wished to have a fiat banking imperial system across the world, the thing we know of today, the reason we got the Federal Reserve, I think the people that were setting all that up saw Russia as a growing threat to their order, right? Very different folks over here, probably not connected with that same banking cartel. And in order to destabilize that country so that they don't become a threat or become more powerful than the British Empire or the Western empires or the liberal economic order of the day, I think they planted communism and riled up that revolution, started the fire there, set the blaze, kicked the sparks off so that Russia would not be a problem for them in World War I or World War II. Which I'm not sure how that exactly worked out. It definitely served the means of destabilization. It definitely took, it definitely destabilized. It definitely destabilized. Now, did it work out perfectly? Maybe not. History and hindsight is 2020. But I think at the time, Britain, the Crown, the proto MI6 or special branch investigations of the military at that time, I think they had an idea of what socialism could be, what communism could be, and how destructive it could be for the coherence of a system. And I think that's why they kept a special eye on people who were like labor movement folks, communists. They didn't suppress it completely. But Lenin, the very same Lenin that founded all this, he spent a lot of time in London. Karl Marx spent a lot of time in London. Trotsky spent a lot of time in London. And there's some weird connections with money and banking and the funding to do all this, the arms to do all this, the backing. The backing to throw that Russian Revolution came from, some of the financial backing came from places like London, came from New York, came from really rich bankers who might have had a vested interest in seeing something like that pop off or go off. Or because if you think about this also, a communist state in Russia means very few people controlling all the means of production and all of the surplus, exports, imports, all the money that might, all the resources of the whole country are sort of, they're nationalized. They're controlled by the state, right? And so if you're one of those few oligarchs at the top, and you're running an international banking cartel, and the Czar and the royal family, the royal family of Russia doesn't really want to play ball because they love Russia and they don't really want to sell Russia out to other countries or to some globalist organization, then, they got the carrot or the stick. And so the liberal economic order gave them the stick and set the whole thing on fire with the Russian Revolution. And then, almost 100 years later, they're kind of coming back around, and Russia's now like a viable economy. They've got like a decent GDP and they make some shit over there and they make oil and gas and all. But it's been a long time. So, I don't know, was it? This isn't my idea. There's a bunch of Russians that wrote about stuff like this, like having survived it all and seen it all. And there's some people that put together some paper trails and follow the money sort of thing. But I don't know. Doesn't it sound to you like communism could be used as a weapon? We all know about that famous video of Yuri Bezmenov, the former KGB agent, talking about ideological subversion and how they will get into a culture, subvert it from within, get into the universities, corrupt those people, start teaching something that's wrong, teach a hatred for America, teach a distorted view of our history, and to instill a dissatisfaction with the state, with the way things are, with life, and to take away hope. Take away that hope. If you take away that hope, you make the seeds for some social revolution. And if you're going to overthrow a system and make it in whatever image you want to, it's a really good technique. So, I don't know. Was the communist revolution planned? Oh, the one in Russia? I don't know. Maybe. And maybe it is a little piece of evidence, knowing that they eventually kind of became less communist too, because China isn't even really all that communist. They're more just authoritarian now, more of a technocratic fascist sort of state where the party controls everything, but there are free enterprises. I don't know. It's a weird thing. I don't know. What do you think? Take it with you. Take these thoughts with you. Think about communism. Think about ways of riling up dumb people and maybe implement them in your own life. Maybe it's about time that you stage a coup in your workplace and get rid of your boss for some reason. Maybe it's time you start preaching Bolshevism in the office around the water cooler. Try it out for yourself. Well, all right. Thank you very much for watching. If you watched all the way till now, if you did, I love you so much. Appreciate you watching. And I'll see you next time where we will talk about other very fun stuff. Until then.